It is a bit unclear why storms all now have to be given names, but the oddly titled Doris has managed to bring much of the country to a halt today. There was quite a lot of damage and sadly one fatality, but most mark perhaps the shutdown of large parts of the transport network again.
There's no information whatsoever. It's pandemonium in there, absolute pandemonium.
My trains have been cancelled over 3 times and I can't get home. I have no money.
We'll have the latest tonight on what tomorrow is going to look like. Also on News at 10. Immigration falls, but it still clocks in at just under 300,000 a year. The battle for Mosul, the Iraqis backed by airstrikes and British and US special forces retake the airport. By-election night, could Labour really lose both seats? It's not just in Europe, the massive refugee crisis in Burma, and football's fairy tale does not end happily. Leicester's Ranieri is out tonight.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. There is nothing you can do, of course, to stop trees blowing down in the wind, but the tendency for much of the nation's transport network to grind to a halt at the first whiff of unusual weather is pretty aggravating for a great many people. And once again today, a well-forecast storm seemed to paralyse large parts of the country. The 2 main railway lines between northern Britain and London were among the worst hit. Passengers on Virgin's East and West Coast services were told to come back tomorrow, just the kind of helpful advice you hope will greet your evening commute. Flights have been cancelled or diverted, roads and bridges have closed. In Wolverhampton, a woman was very sadly killed by a flying block of wood, and in Milton Keynes, a schoolgirl was critically injured by a collapsing sports hall as the storm whipped on through.
When the storm arrived, it was deadly. For days, forecasters had warned of the dangers of Storm Doris, and here in Wolverhampton, the high winds claimed the life of a young woman. She was passing a coffee shop in the city centre when she was struck by a piece of flying debris from a roof and died of her injuries at the scene. In Milton Keynes, a schoolgirl is fighting for her life tonight after the collapse of a ceiling in a sports hall. One other child was injured at Southwood Middle School. The incident's been linked to Storm Doris. The dangers of high winds caused disruption across the country. This fallen tree on a trackside power line, just one of the hazards that caused dozens of train services to be cancelled and mainline stations to fill with passengers going nowhere.
There's no information whatsoever. It's pandemonium in there, absolute pandemonium.
I'm still not home and my trains have been cancelled over 3 times and I can't get home. I have no money and I can't get hold of my parents, so I don't know what I'm going to do.
The advice from motoring organisations today was to drive with care, but however much care drivers took, there was no guarantee of safety. The winds were just too strong, the hazards too unexpected. In Lincolnshire and in Cambridgeshire, hundreds of miles from where Doris made her landfall, she still packed a punch, overturning this truck on the A1, the driver counting himself lucky to walk away in one piece.
I was going to turn round at the next one and go and park up. It just, as soon as the wind got it, lifted it up. That was it, I was gone. The dash there that's hit me on the head, and then they had to get me out through the window.
29
In Manchester, passengers hoping for an easy landing at the airport found their planes approaching the runway at a crazy angle as pilots fought the wind. This one thought better of even trying to land here. The highest recorded wind speeds were in North Wales, 94 miles an hour, but everywhere along the coast, the high winds brought trouble.
It was first thing this morning with gusts of 100 miles an hour predicted. The decision was taken to close the port of Liverpool for the safety of its contractors and its customers. The wind may have abated slightly in the last few hours, but conditions on the roads across the northwest of England are still as hazardous as ever.
Further north, the wind brought snow, and for motorists in Scotland, the prospect of hours waiting for roads to be cleared of jackknifed lorries. The M80 between Glasgow and Stirling closed after a heavy fall of snow made it impassable. As ever, the extreme weather was a spectacle to some. These walkers in Dorset almost caught out by the waves. For the unwary, the hazards of a walk to work through Liverpool have never been greater. The damage that Doris has done to property will take time and money to repair, and many of those who escaped injury or worse can count themselves lucky. Damon Green, News at 10, Merseyside.
Well, a lot of rail services are still disrupted tonight, as many of you are no doubt all too well aware. Let's talk to Duncan Golestani, who joins us from King's Cross. Duncan, how's it looking both tonight and tomorrow?
Well, on the two big north-south routes, trains are now starting to move. The problem is there are very few trains, they are massively delayed and they are subject to last-minute cancellations. There are still disruptions from the strong winds, from debris on the lines, and now trains and train staff in the wrong parts of the country. So still in this station and lots of other stations, tired, frustrated people wanting to get home. Believe it or not, that is an improvement, because for many hours on the East Coast Main Line and the West Coast Main Line, no trains were running between north and south. Virgin Trains even asking people just not to travel today, to come back tomorrow. Talking of tomorrow, Virgin say they hope to run a full timetable, but it will be very busy. And Midlands Trains similarly saying that they want to get back to normal, but there will be disruptions, not a full service. Glimmers of hope then, Tom, but still a bit of a mess.
OK, Duncan, let's see, but thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, one of the predicted effects of the Brexit vote was that there would be a dash among EU nationals to get into Britain before the metaphorical drawbridge was pulled up. As ever with Brexit, perhaps things have turned out rather differently. Overall, net migration, the number of new arrivals minus those leaving the UK, was 273,000. That's a lot, but down by 15% on the previous year and the lowest for 2 years. That's mostly as a result of the number of people leaving, 323,000 in a year, up 9% on the previous 12 months. There was one interesting anomaly. The numbers arriving from Romania and Bulgaria hit 74,000, up more than a third. But perhaps because of a fear of being kicked out, over 65,000 Europeans were granted British residency in 2016. That's up 261% on 2015.
Radio Star.
Witam serdecznie w dzisiejszym...
At Radio Star in Peterborough today, listeners are being asked to email in their views on living in the UK. The Polish radio station serves the large Polish community across the country, and I sat in to listen to the debate.
How do you feel about living in the UK at the moment, especially after the referendum?
I think, feeling a little bit upset, betrayed, and kind of unwelcome here.
That was Agnieszka Sobieraj. I went to meet her. She's a nurse who says Brexit has prompted her to leave.
For quite a long time, people from European Union, they've been left without any kind of guide what is going to happen to us. So I was thinking Ireland, because of one of the reasons is the language.
She says she's not alone and isn't surprised the number of Eastern Europeans leaving the UK has risen. But that's not the whole story. The number of Romanians and Bulgarians coming here is at record levels. Despite this, the government, which aims to get immigration below 100,000, is encouraged.
What these numbers demonstrate is that there is a welcome form from the non-EU migration, so that it demonstrates that we can reduce immigration where we can control it.
Labour, though, are not convinced. They question how much in reality the government really can do, and the Liberal Democrats agree.
Immigration is a very important and a very positive thing for the UK economy. And you can see from the number of people who are coming into the UK from outside the EU, the government still haven't got a grip. So what is leaving the EU going to make? What difference is that going to make?
So why the drop in numbers? The truth is we simply don't know yet. It could be because of the Brexit effect. It could be because of the drop in the value of the pound. So people can earn more money elsewhere, or it could just be the natural cycle of things. It's simply too early to say. What we do know, though, is that the issue of immigration has dominated for months, and it's likely to dominate for many more months to come.
Peterborough's seen huge levels of immigration in the last 5 years, and these residents point out the effect a reduction might have.
If they were to go back in mass, then perhaps the farmers might need to up the wages a little bit.
On a whole, they do a good job if they're here, some of them, but it's the hangers-on that are just coming for the money.
The figures come as new evidence suggests the numbers of EU nationals wanting to stay here permanently are at record levels. It's a complex picture with no easy answer. Emily Morgan, News at 10 in Peterborough.
The battle to drive self-styled Islamic State out of its last stronghold in Iraq has for weeks now been focused on the northern city of Mosul. The Iraqi army, backed by American airstrikes, took back the eastern half of the city last month. Now they've taken what is left of the airport. After IS put it out of action, it isn't much use for anything, to be honest, but it does provide a gateway to the west of the city, which is still held by Islamic State.
Retaking Mosul airport, just like retaking the whole city, is a grueling, slow and bloody process. Despite the presence of heavy weapons, the Iraqi army is trying its best not to lay complete waste to the city's infrastructure. And so fighting is inch by inch, street by street. But today's advance on the airport is significant and will be yet another psychological blow for so-called Islamic State, who are being battered from the ground and from the air. Right now, thank God, we're inside Mosul airport, this Iraqi commander said. We're liberating it. His men hold up the discarded black flag of so-called IS, but they have a long road ahead to completely defeat them. The fighting today is focused on this airport, Mosul's only airfield, along with the neighbouring military base. This is the start of what the Iraqi government hopes will be the final offensive to retake the city. The east was finally cleared of IS fighters towards the end of last year, but with all the bridges destroyed, this attack has had to come from the south. After securing these two objectives, the focus will turn to two major highways that will help move around the west of the city. But the toughest fights will come beyond that in the old city, within its tight, packed, narrow streets, where the jihadists are likely to wage a guerrilla war. Iraqi forces are being heavily supported by Western allies, providing airstrikes and advice. The coalition spokesman says IS fighters face a stark choice in the coming weeks.
Well, what I would say is this is the beginning of the end for this enemy in Mosul. They are going to be driven from the city. They have an opportunity to surrender, or they're going to be killed there. It's really about as simple as that.
The battle for Mosul is now moving beyond the outskirts of the city and deeper into populated areas. As it does so, we'll see more of this, families fleeing. So far it's been difficult for many, as IS has made it hard. For many others, especially Sunni Iraqis, they fear sectarian bloodletting by Shia militias fighting alongside the Iraqi army. Even when so-called IS is defeated, Mosul's agonies will not be over. Raghu Oman, News at 10.
Well, back here, the counting has started in what could be a historic by-election night. Voters in two Labour-held constituencies have been braving the elements to decide today whether to stick or twist. One is in Stoke Central. We'll be joining Carl Dinnan there in a moment. The other is the constituency of Copeland in Cumbria, and Paul Brand joins us from the town of Whitehaven. Paul, let's maybe go to you first. The Tories obviously think they've got a chance in Copeland, have they?
Well, Tom, as you know, by-elections are traditionally a chance to send a strong signal to Westminster. And, yeah, I think it is the opposition and not the government that could take the real kicking tonight, the first time in something like 35 years. The first ballot boxes have just started arriving here now. Both sides are incredibly nervous. I'm told it is very close. Labour are very worried about turnout. They think they've struggled to get some of their voters down to the polling stations. Why? Well, some Labour sources say it's because of their leader, and we've certainly come across several voters, Labour voters in the past few days, who say they won't come out for Corbyn. This area is heavily dependent on the nuclear industry, an industry which he has spent much of his life opposing. But we'll find out at about 3 o'clock in the morning whether they can hold on to this seat.
OK, Paul, thank you very much. Let's go to Carl in Stoke-on-Trent. Carl, let's be honest, it's very hard to imagine Labour losing Stoke-on-Trent. Do you think it's a real possibility?
Oh, yes, very much so. It really shouldn't be that way, but this is 50-50. Going into today, I would have said that Labour might just about edge it and hang on, but tonight UKIP have been sounding a little bit more confident. Certainly the weather will have depressed turnout, which was already expected to be quite low. The voters of Stoke aren't great enthusiasts for the democratic process here, so that makes it even more unpredictable. And it just shouldn't be this way, because Labour have held this seat ever since it came into being. So if they do lose, as they might tomorrow, it will rock Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. On the other hand, if UKIP lose, it's their leader, Paul Nuttall, who's their candidate. His early leadership will also be tainted if it goes that way.
OK, an awful lot at stake, Carl. Thank you very much indeed. Now, as the manager who presided over English football's greatest fairy tale, you might say, Claudio Ranieri won a special place in the affections of Leicester City fans and in the annals of the sport, one might even say. But football management is a precarious business. That's the understatement of the year. Even if you have guided an unfancy club to the Premier League title, memories are short, results are everything. And tonight, after a string of bad ones and with relegation looming, the club sacked him. Our sports editor, Steve Scott, is here. Steve, let's begin at the beginning. Can you bring us up to speed on what's actually happened tonight and what they've all said?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you sort of indicated there, nothing should really shock us about what happens in football now, because only last night Leicester City were in Seville in the Champions League. They lost, yes, 2-1, but it was with an away goal, which gives them a pretty good chance of making it through to the quarterfinals of the Champions League. So think about that. The club, with a chance of getting through to the Champions League quarterfinals, have just sacked their manager tonight. Ranieri himself last night said he thought the club had made a turning point to their season last night. Anyway, the club tonight said of Ranieri, his status as the most successful Leicester City manager of all time is without question. However, domestic results in the current campaign have placed the club's Premier League status under threat, and the board reluctantly feels that a change of leadership, while admittedly painful, is necessary in the club's greatest interest. And it's that Premier League status which obviously is the key to this decision. Leicester 1 point above relegation, only 13 matches left, and, you know, the sums in the Premier League compared with playing in the Championship, tens and tens of millions of pounds.
But we talked about this so much. It was one of the greatest, fairy tale stories in football. I mean, is it fair to describe the club as somewhat ungrateful, or is that naive?
Ungrateful, brutal. You can say you're naive if you like, but a lot of people agree with you. I mean, this is the man, as you quite rightly say, Leicester were 5,000 to 1 to win the Premier League title last year. It was a fairy tale, turning conventional wisdom on its head, and he did it. But I suppose what you're saying, and you're right, is the decision sort of confirms, if you ever needed confirmation, that loyalty in football is an empty word. As you'd expect, reaction tonight's been pretty strong. Gary Lineker, the former England captain, Leicester City player, described it inexplicable. Michael Owen has called it total and utter disgrace. Ian Wright said, I wonder how I'd feel if I was a Leicester player right now. And I suppose what Wright says is quite interesting, because it sums up modern football, if you like. It's far easier to sack a manager, and far cheaper, of course, than it is to sack half a dozen players. I suspect football will do quite a lot of navel-gazing over the next couple of days, and Leicester face some pretty robust questioning when they hold a media conference tomorrow. OK,
Steve, thank you very much indeed. Now, it was nearly 3 years ago that the term Trojan horse was first applied to a handful of schools in Birmingham. The claim then was that Muslim groups got members to become governors of local schools with a view to turning them into strict Islamic schools. There have been inquiries followed by promises that the practice has been tackled. But now News at 10 has obtained a leak of a letter from the government's integration czar saying it hasn't, and that Birmingham City Council is still failing to serve all members of the public.
People hoped teachers would never again come under the pressure they did during the Trojan horse scandal. But then, an extraordinary episode at this quiet Birmingham Catholic primary school.
Birmingham insists it's moved on, but the incident of a counsellor telling this school he wants a 4-year-old to be able to wear a headscarf has raised alarm bells in Westminster. ITV News has seen a letter sent from the government's integration czar to Birmingham City Council. In it, Louise Casey questions whether sufficient lessons have been learnt from the Trojan horse affair.
In the letter, Casey says she fears Birmingham City Council is continually failing to serve all members of the public in its jurisdiction well. She says schools in Birmingham are coming under grossly unfair and undue pressure, and asks why the councillor in question, Councillor Zafar, thought this was an appropriate use of his office. At the heart of this is Birmingham councillor Wasim Zafar, a high-profile and well-connected Labour cabinet member for equalities. When St Clair's Catholic School asked the parents of a 4-year-old girl to respect their uniform and remove her headscarf, Councillor Zafar met the headmistress before saying on Facebook the school had contravened the Equalities Act and insisting that this matter be addressed ASAP with a change of policy. It emerged Councillor Zafar was the pupil's uncle, something he says he disclosed to the school. But even though he says he was speaking as a local councillor, some question whether he's broken a code of conduct. The former head of Ofsted, who dealt with the Trojan horse scandal while in office, believes Birmingham's problems remain.
head teachers still feel isolated, still feel alone, and still feel that the local authority and the council are not up to the job of protecting them. The problems of corporate governance are so serious that it needs a high-profile commissioner to be there on a fairly permanent basis to hold the council's feet to the fire.
This primary school head teacher who tackled the problem at her school says it's not been eliminated across the whole city.
In my school, firmly and robustly it has gone. Mainly because the governors are absolutely fantastic, the parents are, the staff are, and we are so clear on our ethos. However, I'm not sure if it's like that in all schools. In fact, I know it's not like that in all schools. And that's a real worry, because the bullying nature of this behaviour is such that they will look for a weakness.
Now, a former equalities advisor to Birmingham Council says Wassim Zafar is in the wrong.
I think he is. I believe that the school is in compliance with the equalities legislation. There's no requirement or obligation on a 4-year-old child, female child, to wear a headscarf. These are matters that should have been discussed privately.
Sir Michael Wilshaw thinks Councillor Zafar should go.
Well, he should be removed. Here's a man who's supposed to be in charge of the equalities brief who doesn't understand his brief. And he's upset people, and needlessly so. And he should go.
In a statement this evening, Birmingham City Council defended Zafar's actions, saying he acted with their knowledge. And the wider questions posed by the government's integration czar's letter remain, whether Birmingham's teachers are right now truly protected. Allegra Stratton, News at 10, Birmingham.
If you hear the term refugee, most people probably think of those fleeing Syria or Iraq. But in the Southeast Asian nation of Myanmar, or Burma, as it is still perhaps better known, there is a very different kind of refugee crisis. It was described to us today by the United Nations as harrowing and devastating. It involves the Rohingya people, said to be one of the most persecuted communities in the world. For decades, they've been denied most human rights and marginalised in their own country. Indeed, the abuses have even continued under Aung San Suu Kyi, who herself fought for freedom, of course, from military rule. So no surprise, you might argue, that hundreds of thousands have fled, taking refuge across the border in Bangladesh. But authorities there now want to move them on again to the remote and seemingly uninhabitable island of Thengar Char.
This is Thengar Char. It's remote, it's sparse, and it's where the Bangladesh government would like to put Rohingya refugees. Our journey to get there began with a speedboat from Chittagong to Sandwip Island. We then crossed from the east to west coast by tuk-tuk and by foot to meet the fishing crew who had agreed to take us. The crossing in the northern tip of the Bay of Bengal can be dangerous. We travelled with 3 armed police officers and a Coast Guard escort due to the threat of pirates. Even by boat, the island is hard to access. We landed at a temporary jetty created by those assessing the viability of the relocation project. The government is looking at ways of making it habitable, such as planting more trees to shore up the land.
It's hard to see how anybody could live here, let alone hundreds of thousands of refugees. It seems a sanctuary more fitting for birds than people, and in a few weeks' time, when monsoon season arrives, most of the island will be submerged.
It is a solution to an unwanted burden in Bangladesh. They want to develop Cox's Bazar into a major tourist resort, but the local authorities say Rohingya refugees are ruining its reputation. A few miles away are the makeshift camps, now home to hundreds of thousands who have fled their homes in Myanmar. They have been described as the world's most persecuted people. Everyone we met had a story of devastating cruelty, of a journey which was fraught with fear and danger. Tayyaba Aftar broke down in tears as she described the violence she had suffered. Her eldest son was killed, her husband is missing, and she and the women in her village were raped.
The Myanmar government denies such accounts and says reports of genocide are exaggerated. 67-year-old Rahul Amin was shot in the arm when trouble flared last October. There's now a daily influx into the camps in Bangladesh, and the Rohingya people have become a problem the government is desperate to solve. Despite warnings it is completely unsuitable, a helipad indicates the idea of the island is being taken seriously. One regional official working on the plan showed a clear disdain for the refugees.
রোহিঙ্গারা আসুক তাতে আমাদের কোনো আপত্তি নেই, কিন্তু তাদের অভ্যাসগত যে চরিত্রগুলো রয়েছে সেটা যাতে হিতে বিপরীত না হয়, এটা আমাদের দাবি।
The Rohingya people are stateless, penniless, and it seems becoming increasingly isolated. Debbie Edward, News at 10, Bangladesh.
I'll just shake the notion that looked a lot more like a prison than a sanctuary. Now to another story we talked about last night, the sinister side of the trend for sparkly makeup, which we reported on News at 10 yesterday. We showed you Shamil, a 6-year-old Indian boy who works in an illegal, unregulated mine, bashing mica crystals out of stones, the mineral that goes into certain brands of makeup. So does the cosmetics industry here know what is going on in its name? Surely not, you might say. Well, we've discovered that it has actually known for some time about the use of child labour, but still can't guarantee it is not used in today's makeup.
Britain's £8 billion beauty business gives mica its most visible outlet. It adds sparkle to a range of cosmetics. Although the ingredient goes into many other industries in greater quantities, this is where consumers are likely to have their most intimate brush with it.
It's really been pushed by manufacturers at the moment. All the looks are very highlighted on the cheekbones, even down the nose.
What do you think the reaction of the makeup industry and its customers is going to be to this?
Like myself, I think they're going to be absolutely horrified when they find out what's been happening about exploiting young children, and I think that they're going to want more answers.
ITV News has spoken to the big cosmetic firms. Owners of Maybelline, L'Oreal, says its supply is now almost completely secured, using legal gated mines only. Estée Lauder says it's spearheading an effort to reduce child labour, and less than 10% of its mica comes from India. Rimmel says its mica supplies are asked to comply with a code of conduct. Boots too told us its supplies provide specific assurances no child labour is used.
As a direct ingredient, mica is pretty easy to find, but what they discovered here is that it's also used as part of a complex mix of ingredients in this industry, what this firm called the murky world of mica.
Lush tried to ban all mined mica in 2014. It says it's still determined and never knowingly uses it. This industry is aware ethics is a far more important ingredient than sparkle, so it's worked for years to tackle the mica problem. But the substance is also used in car paint and electronics, so the head of a new responsible mica initiative says others must now help.
We need automotive brands, we need electronic brands to join forces and join the Responsible Mica initiative.
Cosmetic firms know the task is huge. They think it could take 5 years. Around 25% of world production of mica comes from illegal collection, and that's a potential image problem for an industry that thrives on the way things look. Chris Choi, News at 10.
And finally, a quiz question to end tonight's programme. You know how we love quizzes. What do the actress Naomi Harris and the Queen have in common? You're probably ahead of me already. But one answer is that they've both appeared with James Bond. Another is that they were together at Buckingham Palace today.
Naomi Harris for services to drama.
Naomi Harris was there for Her Majesty's not very secret service, the presentation of her OBE. Her career seems to be on the up and up. She may well win an Oscar on Sunday. It'll be Nina here tomorrow. I'll be back on Monday. But for now, good night and thank you very much for watching.